dedicated to each and every one of you who appreciate a great glass of wine. You know what I mean?
It's Monday. Let's raise a glass to the beginning of another week. It's time to unscrew, uncork, or saber a bottle. And let's begin exploring the wine glass. Welcome back to Winephabet Street, where we explore the wonderful world of wine one letter at a time. Today, we're traveling to the beautiful Hudson Valley in New York to uncork the magic of T is for Traminette. This hybrid grape might be a mouthful, but it's also bursting with personality. Known for its floral aromatics and vibrant flavors, it is the star of tonight's episode. We're thrilled to have Michael Migliore, owner and winemaker at Whitecliff Vineyard, joining us to dive into what makes Traminette such a hidden gem. With decades of experience in sustainable winemaking, Michael will share his expertise and passion for crafting wines that celebrate the terroir of New York. While you are listening, it would be greatly appreciated if you could take 1 minute to subscribe, rate, and review. It takes only a few seconds of your time, but means so much to the show. Also, please be sure to check that box for automatic downloads so that new episodes of Exploring the Wine Glass show up in your next up feed. Next best way to support Exploring the Wine Glass is to tell your friends, because if you enjoy the podcast, your wine-loving friends too. Follow me on all the socials, and finally, don't forget to head to the website, exploringthewineglass.com, to read the blog, sign up for the newsletter, and keep up with all happenings. Sláinte! Hey everybody, I'm Lori Budd, a UC Davis winemaking program, Spanish wine scholar, sommelier service, champagne and Côte d'Aron specialist, and a WSET Level 2 graduate. You can find Exploring the Wine Glass on all the socials, as well as your favorite podcast catchers. If you haven't subscribed yet, now's the perfect time to swipe, subscribe, rate, and review. Stay in the know about all things wine by visiting my website, exploringthewineglass.com. I promise I'll never tell you what to drink, but I'll always share what's in my glass.
All right, here we are.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Winephabet Street. It has been quite the moment between restaurants needing to get their liquor licenses and Harvest going insane and everything else that goes on in life. We are finally back with Winephabet Street for the letter T, and we are talking Traminette today. And you know what? I don't think I've ever had it, so I'm pretty excited. Unfortunately, I'm not going to get to try today, but we've been promised we're going to get it in the future when it comes back into stock. But in case you don't know who I am Lori. My husband and I own Gersino Wines in Paso Robles. I am also Exploring the Wine Glass. So a wine educator, brand ambassador, Spanish wine scholar, champagne specialist, WSET Level 2, and Côte d'Aron specialist. And and I have missed my co-host for a long time, Deb.
I've missed you too. I'm Debbie Giaquindo. I'm known as the Hudson Valley Wine Goddess. I'm a certified specialist of wine, a wine location specialist in port and champagne, and a certified sherry wine specialist. I am chairperson for the Hudson Valley Wine and Spirits and Cider Competition. And I own a restaurant in North Wildwood called Trio North Wildwood. We're open through New Year's Eve, just closed January, February, and March. And we just got a liquor license, and that took up a lot of time. So between liquor license, harvest, I'm glad we're back. Put it that way. And I love Traminette. I've had the wonderful opportunity to drink a lot of Traminette in my past and hopefully future. And it's with great pleasure that I introduce Michael is my wine mentor, Michael Migliore, of Whitecliff Vineyards and Winery in the Hudson Valley. And Michael, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hello, everyone. Michael Migliore. I'm co-owner of Whitecliff Vineyard and Winery. Whitecliff Vineyard and Winery in the Hudson Valley. I've been growing grapes for 45 years. This is the 25th anniversary of the 25th anniversary of our wine tasting room and winery. And we now have 3 vineyards scattered around the Hudson Valley in Gardner, Hudson, and over in Middle Hope. This has been a real adventure for me. My background is as a chemist and a semiconductor engineer. So while I had that career at IBM, I was also building vineyards and building the winery. So this was supposed to be my retirement project, but as my wife says, I'm a complete failure at retirement. And it's been great fun. It's been a great adventure. We're about we vary between 6,000 and 8,000 case production. We produce over 30 different wines, everything from Method Champenois sparkling, Pet Nats, to Chardonnay, Cabernet Sauvignon, you name it, Gamay Noir, and up to and including different ports that we do, and a dessert wine too, ice wine. So with that,
All right.
ask me some questions.
Let's talk Traminette.
Yes, let's talk Traminette.
So, first of all, Whitecliff Vineyard and Winery is located in Gardner, New York. The main, right, is Gardner,
Right,
New York.
that's our main vineyard and production site, tasting room, and then we have another tasting room and vineyard in Hudson, New York, about an hour north of here.
All right. So, can you just let people know where is Gardner, New York? Like, how do they get to you? Let's go that way.
So,
where is it?
we are north of New York City, about an hour and 20 minutes. So the Hudson River goes right by New York City. If you went straight up the river in a boat, like Henry Hudson did, and you could stop in Newburgh would be the nearest river town, and that's about 20 minutes, 18 miles due east of us. And then if you stayed on the Hudson River north of Newburgh, and you would get to a small town of Middle Hope, which is near Marlborough, and we have a vineyard on the cliffs overlooking the Hudson River there, which produces our champagne grapes, both
Ooh.
Pinot Noir and Chardonnay. And then if you continued on the river up to the city of Catskill on the west bank of the river, with a beautiful view of the Catskill Mountains, right across from that city, we have a vineyard on the slopes of the Hudson River, of which we are now in the process of further expanding. So that is our premier site for growing vinifera grapes. If you saw it, you would think you were on the Mosel or Rhine River Valley. It's that dramatic a site.
Wow. And what a better way. I mean, geez, just take a boat and go to vineyards. It's awesome.
I would encourage people, you want to see pictures of what we're all about, go to our website, whitecliffwine.com, and just click on photos. You'll see what you're missing.
Right.
It is really beautiful. It really is beautiful. I mean, all your vineyards, I've been to all 3. They're all beautiful.
Yeah,
You know,
maybe that's why they gave me the first time ever somebody in the Hudson Valley Wine Grower of the Year, New York Wine and Grape Foundation.
Congratulations.
Yeah. So, Michael, so tell us the origin story. You said, you were a chemist for IBM. How did you come into, developing your winery, your love of wine? Why did you start the winery?
So I come from a family of Italians, as you most can recognize by my last name. So both my father's mother and father were from Italy. One was from Rome, and the other was from the Amalfi Coast. And then on the other side of my mother's side of the family, her mother was French from Alsace, and my grandfather was German from the Miltenberg on Main, which is surrounded by vineyards. So growing up, both of my grandfathers made wine. My grandfather, believe it or not, in New York City, my Italian grandfather had a vineyard in his backyard in the Bronx section of the Bronx.
Oh my goodness.
So as kids in family of European heritage, wine was available for us to taste. We didn't taste much wine as kids, but it was always there. They would dilute it with water. That was probably our first exposure to it. So it was always something that was, harvest time was always a harvest time for grapes, even though my German grandfather would buy grapes from someplace else. So the way that I got into it is I have a master's in chemistry, which I got from University in New Falls. And while I was in graduate school, I rented the farm that currently surrounds us. It was 350 acres at the time. And my farming practices were raising dairy cattle and also taking in hay. We would take in 15,000 bales of hay in the barn across the way. And I'd sell the hay over the wintertime while I was going to graduate school. So I'd always known farming. I'd had a bunch of friends that were farmers. And then the question became, all right, I wanted to, when I got the job at IBM, I all of a sudden became bankable. So I could actually buy property and buy houses and everything like that. So I bought a section of the farm. I bought 18 acres at the time. And then the question was, well, what am I going to do with it? Am I going to continue to take in hay or raise cattle? But I decided to put in a small planting of grapes. And those grapes were French-American hybrids at the time. They were Foch and Aurora, two really terrible grape varieties, by the way, for making wine. The grapes didn't taste bad. And then it was 10 years of experimental work planting vinifera varieties on the property, a few rows at a time, in over an acre. So those varieties, and this was all to understand, could we grow vinifera grapes on the property? And then could we make wine that was acceptable for commercial release? So we did that over a long period of time, very slowly, making 5 15-gallon batches of wine at the time. And came down to the conclusion that it was very much the Loire Valley and Burgundy wine varieties that would do well here. So we then proceeded, and also the Beaujolais region. So we planted Gamay Noir grapes, we planted Pinot Noir, we planted Cabernet Franc and Chardonnay. And we then marched on to plant the first 10 or 15 acres of the property at the time. And then in the mid-90s, we purchased another 52 acres, which is adjacent to us, which was farmland, and then started planting that out. And those years in the mid-90s were large plantings, 5 to 8 acres at a time. And consequently, then we branched out into Riesling, which turned out to be a very good choice. And also we grow hybrids, and that was, before we bought the extra land, we planted Traminette. That's when that one came in. I've been closely associated with Cornell University from the very beginning. They do a lot of grape breeding. Bruce Reich he's retired now, but he was the main grape breeder up there. So we would get new grape varieties that had not been released to the public yet, but were given to growers and winemakers to test to see what kind of growing conditions they needed, whether they would get good yields, whether they were disease resistant, and what was the quality of the grapes. So we did that with a bunch of different experimental grapes, which had code names, like New York 81. another one. So consequently, I think on 4 or 5 of the grape varieties that we worked on with Cornell have been released commercially. And at that time, Traminette was one of the early releases. So
Do you remember its code name?
I just saw it again. I looked it up, but it was something like New York's. It starts with the year that they release it, and it was a New York 75, I think, was the first year that they released
Okay.
it. It was early on. They didn't release it until maybe it was 78 or someplace around there. So we worked closely with Cornell. I was on an advisory committee for winemaking for 10 years. We would meet. I was the Hudson Valley representative. There would be representatives from Long Island, Finger Lakes, and all the other regions. So I know those guys, and I turn to them for help all the time. But Debbie has heard this story. We would. When we started out, you only had one chance, during the year. You harvest the grapes, you make some wine, and you make mistakes. And then next year, you try and correct that, and you maybe make more mistakes. So my wife and I were thinking of actually calling our vineyard and winery Fiasco Winery. And our motto is going to be, we learn by our mistakes.
That is really a lot of winemaking
It is.
because you don't know what is going to go wrong. Yeah. And then you gotta figure out a way to especially right the wrong.
Our winemaking team and myself, we joke that we've turned to natural winemaking because in many instances you try to lead the market or you react to the market, and so we're doing a whole series of wines. In fact, that's what happened to the Gewürztraminer and our Traminette. It was such a success. It sold out immediately, and we don't call them natural wines because that would mean that regular wines are not natural. Right. We just call non-intervention wines. So we use natural yeast that's on the grapes. We have very little sulfide additions. We are very little fining, and now we've transitioned into our natural wine product line or non-intervention. We're doing pet nats, and we see that as carbonated wines are very much an expanding business. If you read Wine Business Monthly, you can see what's happening in the United States. You'll see that rosé sales are falling off. The only thing that's growing are Sauvignon Blancs and maybe Albarino. So we look at that. We look at where our strengths are and where we can expand into the market.
Okay. So you did mention that you deal with hybrids, that Traminette is a hybrid. So I have realized that people don't really understand the concept of what a hybrid is. Mm-hmm. So I talk about Cab Franc being the father of Cabernet Sauvignon, and they're like, oh, so Cabernet Sauvignon is a hybrid. I'm like, no, it's not a hybrid. That's something different. So can you explain what a hybrid really is so that people can kind of get that grasp?
There's a number of different families of grapes. Vinifera, which contains Chardonnay and Cabernet Sauvignon, and the more recognizable and the traditional ones of Europe, that those original grapes originated in Iran or the Caucasus Mountains or Georgia or something like that. So those varieties were planted throughout Europe and were brought to the United States and planted, but by Thomas Jefferson in the original ones. They didn't survive long. They died pretty early because they were not resistant to a natural insect that was in American soil called phylloxera. So it would attack the roots, the plants would die, and then you'd be without a source of grapes for your wine. This phylloxera spread to Europe in the 19th century and wiped out the grapes all over Europe. And the way that the vinifera grapes are grown today and the way they survive is they are grafted onto American rootstock, which is a different species, and they are they can be planted, and then the phylloxera insect won't attack it. A hybrid grape is a cross. You take the pollen from the Labrusca native or Riparia, another native variety, and you cross that with a vinifera variety, you will come up with an interspecific variety that is both. And it will have different properties. It'll have, like, if you get married, your child is going to have some of your properties and some of your husband's properties. And those are hybrids. And they were done in the 19th century in order to have grapevines that would survive the phylloxera epidemic before they figured out that you could graft a rootstock of say, Riparia onto a vinifera variety, in which the upper part of the plant, the scion, would produce true to type, Chardonnay or Cabernet Sauvignon. So it's just, they were crossed, and that's Traminette contains one of those crosses, not a very successful one from the 19th century. In fact, there was a recent survey, they couldn't even find one vine even alive anymore. And it was crossed with a vinifera variety called Gewürztraminer. Now, this was sort of like the marriage of Beauty and the Beast, where the child kept all of the beauty of Gewürztraminer. It kept the flavors, it kept the color, it kept we'll go through all of its attributes, but its bouquet. And the Beast, the hybrid that nobody grows anymore and was never really that good a grape, brought in disease resistant to powdery mildew, downy mildew, and also brought in a colder winter temperature mortality. So if you take Gewürztraminer, it's really pretty sensitive. And if you get down to around 4 or 5 degrees below zero, you'll start doing damage to the buds that you need for the following year's crop. When you crossed it with this hybrid, it now is hardy down to -16 Fahrenheit.
Oh, wow.
That's a big deal.
That is huge. Now, do you know what the grape that's not produced anymore, the other parent is?
Yeah, I do. It's something. It's a French hybridizer. The story of this is this grape variety, Traminette, was not developed at Cornell. It was developed at the University of Illinois, and they sent some seeds to Cornell because Cornell had a breeding program to evaluate. So that was like 1965, and then it was like 10 years before Bruce Reich and them even started really looking at it. It was originally developed as an eating grape, not a wine grape. But they found it had such good properties for wine that they started promoting it that way. But the cross was Johannes Sebre, Seyve, and he was the hybridizer, and his family were hybridizers. They were responsible for Saval, if you ever heard of that grape variety. It's another hybrid. And that hybrid had just had a code number, 23.416. And that hybrid was a cross of a couple of viniferas and a couple of other, sort of obscure vines.
So when exactly did New York State begin producing Traminette? You said in the 70s? Yeah,
it was a little bit later. It was more like 96.
96?
First commercially available bottle.
Okay. So
people like myself, we were growing it, evaluating it before we got into major production.
Got it. And why did you choose to plant it?
Oh, because talking to Cornell, I look at, every year I would go see Bruce Reich and say, okay, what do you got happening here? What's promising? And then say, okay, give me some vines, give me the good stuff, right? Because you want to, I just alluded to it, you want to be ahead of the curve, and it takes 4 years before you get a grapevine into production. And
it's like inside trading.
Yeah, a little bit. And then, sometimes the vines that, we're promising and we evaluate never make it to release commercially. We have a Muscat variety, which has never been named, and it's New York 84 that we grow, and we love it, but they picked a different one to Valden Muscat when they released that. So it was mainly, experimentation, and we do that, in winemaking. We do that with grape growing, and in an effort to just be at least part of, what's going on in terms of research and development.
So part of that research really has a lot to do with what site characteristics that grape. So what site characteristics Traminette enjoys. So what are those characteristics that Traminette is looking for? The soil type, the elevation?
Soil type. They want sandy loam. It doesn't do well on clay. It doesn't do well on even rocky soil. You can plant it in the flatland. It does better on a slope. And probably the most, what yields well, it'll yield, 4 tons to an acre, and that's a really good yield. And it is, you put it on a vertical shoot position trellis because it grows vertically, not like some of the other hybrids, which are just growing a pendulum. And, you need to put it on a single high wire trellis system. The most important thing about Traminette is you have to leaf pull. And that's in order to get sunlight on the grape clusters, and that accelerates the development of the flavor precursors. And if you don't do that, you're going to get a very flat tasting wine that's not interesting. You're not going to get those beautiful spices and floral notes. So that was something, that research came out of Cornell about leaf pulling. You have to do it early, because if you do it late, then the grapes get sunburned, and that's not a good thing. So
is that kind of like Riesling? You know how when Riesling gets too much, I don't want to say too much sun, but you get more of a petrol taste to it?
No, people, Riesling develops that petrol. That is one of the precursors, and probably depending, it's regulated by, again, the amount of sunlight you get on the grape clusters is probably going to accelerate or decelerate that petrol-like overtone. That's just one of its characteristics. The other nice thing about Traminette is you don't have to go out there and drop a lot of clusters. It doesn't tend to overproduce. Grapevines that overproduce, and if you don't do thinning of the vines or dropping clusters, then it retards ripening, and you don't get the right sugars, you don't get the right acid, the pH balance, those type of things. So it's very good about that. It's self-regulating. And we put almost everything on a vertical shoot position, so it fits in with our canopy system. We don't graft it. It doesn't need grafting. The early Cornell work with it found that when you grafted it, it developed winter injury at the grafting union. Oh. So all of these are on their own rooted base.
So are
and
there
with
any
the
other...
sandy, I'm sorry, Deb, but
no, you go ahead.
Between the Ripari, which is resistant to phylloxera, and the sandy soils, which phylloxera can't survive in, you're pretty much zero chance of having infestation.
There was some worry about this early on at Cornell that because of its parentage, there was a vinifera cross in that first hybrid I told you about, and the Traminette is 60% vinifera DNA. So they were worried about it possibly being susceptible to phylloxera, but that must be some magic cutoff point because it's not.
Are there any other regions outside of New York that have found success growing Traminette? Because I only know of Traminette in New York.
No, it's big. It's much bigger out Midwest. Much bigger
Really?
in Ohio, Missouri, Illinois. It's the state grape of Illinois, I think it is.
Oh wow, had no idea.
Yeah, and if you go Wine Searcher and just take a look, you'll see you'll see my wine listed, but you'll also see all of the regions, people that are selling it. And,
That makes sense. That makes sense for what you're describing as what the grapevine is looking for. It makes sense that it's in the Midwest.
Yeah, and they need it. It's a little colder out there.
Right.
This does very well at negative 16, so you can plant it out there in the plains. Yeah, it does quite well out there.
Oh.
And
Yeah.
you had said that that magic number that is okay with the phylloxera, but everything it seems to be susceptible to something. So it's not susceptible. Yeah. Minus 16 is pretty darn strong for weather. Not right. Phylloxera. Is it susceptible to any diseases or
downy mildew?
Downy mildew.
Yeah.
Downy.
Well, it's mildly resistant to powdery, but it's one of these things that, especially with downy, you just got to be proactive in putting a protective covering down. You can use organics on it. You can use copper, and you can use copper and sulfur, and you could grow it as an organic grape. Okay. So it's that. It needs some protection, but it can get by with just organics. Where the vinifera, Chardonnay, for example, is the canary in the coal mine for downy. It's going to get it first. If you see it starting on your Chardonnay, you better get out there because it's all over the place.
Oh, okay.
It just attacks Chardonnay early.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And it grows really well in the Hudson Valley.
Yeah, it does, especially if you put it on a good site. You could easily push it to 5 tons per acre, which is on the high side. But you'd have to have a pretty high planting density. Instead of 800 vines per acre, you'd probably have to put in like 10 or 1100 vines per acre, and you would hit that target. And it's the only problem we've had is really severe winters, and in the past 25 years or 30 years, we've had greater than negative 16, believe it or not.
Okay.
Negative 60?
16.
Oh. Yellow.
No, negative 60 is
there most of my life.
You're like, wait a second, I don't really remember that.
Yeah.
So. And now, a word from our sponsor. Looking for a unique wine tasting experience? Look no further than Dracaena Wines' tasting room in downtown Paso Robles. Located on the corner of 13th and Pine, this charming spot is not your average winery. Founded by passionate wine lovers who also happen to be the brains behind Cab Franc Day, Dracaena Wines is proud to call themselves home of Blanc de Franc. This crisp and elegant white wine has gained a cult following and is just one example of their superb offerings. With over 10 years of consistently receiving 90+ ratings from top critics, these wines are sure to impress even the most discerning palates. So come raise a glass with us and celebrate great wines at Dracaena Wines' tasting room. We've talked about canopy management, we've talked about yields, but what we haven't talked about is the life cycle itself. In terms of its vintage life cycle,
yeah.
Is it an early butter, a late ripener, like slow? How does it go?
Pretty good on that. So spring frost is always a concern. So it bud break is about 2 weeks later than most of the other hybrids. So you're getting a little bit of buffer against the early frosts, where things like Marquette, which is a hybrid, that comes out very early. That's the first thing around here that buds out. So very susceptible. So it gives you some protection there. You've got winter protection. In terms of ripening, it's called a mid-season ripener. So it can usually around here, it'll be anywhere between October 1st and the 15th, you're looking to harvest.
Oh, okay.
And in that case, there's ripeness and then there's maturity. So ripeness is you've met the numbers that you're looking for in terms of sugar, pH, and acidity, but that doesn't mean you've met the flavors. So that's once you get close to those ripeness numbers, it's all about berry tasting, which is going to trigger harvest. And you want to pull them in early. You don't want to let them get heated up in the field. You'll make much better wine out of it because, and we can talk about the winemaking side, but the most important thing there is to get them in the tank when they're cool, no higher than like 60 degrees, 65 degrees, depends on whether you have cooling in your tank, and get them started in the fermentation process. And the other thing you want to do too, all of the flavors are locked up in the skins. And so we talked about sunlight triggering, the production of these precursors to the flavors that you're going to get, the guava, the spiciness, the rose petal, aromas that you get out of that. So what you do as a winemaker, you do a cold soak for like 8 hours to 24 hours. So skin contact. So like the way you would make an orange wine. And then you're drawing out those precursors and concentrating them. And then you want to get them off of the skins. You leave them on the skins too long, the wine will turn phenolic. And you don't want to be doing that. So it's a small window there. You got to be on it, but that's your path to high quality British wine.
Traminette.
Traminette. Yeah, they're interchangeable.
It's same process, right?
They're so close in color and flavor that it's quite remarkable. And what styles of wine can be made with it? Because if I remember correctly, I mean, I like it dry, but then sometimes it's you can do it a little on the
Yeah, you can do semi-dry, dry, and sparkling too, as we just demonstrated.
Ooh, sparkling.
We just did, and that was very, very successful.
Ooh, that sounds good.
So with the sparkling though, you're saying one of the concerns with just making sparkling in general is that you're picking it earlier, so those acids are higher, but you're saying that the phenolics don't really come till later in Traminette. So how do you deal with that balancing?
Balance. Fortunately, the acids hang on pretty well with Traminette.
Oh, okay.
So it's not like Chardonnay or Pinot that we don't look at anything other than acid when we pick those for method champenois. We want 9 to 10 grams per liter of tartaric acid equivalent, and that's the secret to it. It has to be that. Everything else you can sort of get by a manipulator, but that's the comfort spot. We can go a little bit higher on the pet nats and bring it in at 11 or 12 or at 8 or 9, depending on where it's going. So we're still in the ballpark of it, but we're not making a method champenois that we're putting in triage for 6 years or so before we take it out. This is something readily available the following year.
Okay. And then you kind of hinted a bit about the fermentation process in terms of doing the cold soak.
Yep.
Once you're done with the cold soak, whole cluster,
destemming? No, we are destemming it, and we are because of the phenolics, we want juice after the short contact time. So we will destem,
cold soak,
lightly crush, cold soak, and then press off the juice. And then the other secret to this, to maintain all of those beautiful precursors and flavors and spices, we cold ferment. So we put it in a jacketed tank. It never gets above 64 degrees.
And how long does that take to go dry?
Well, that's
Or is that why they're semi-dry?
I had to laugh because we were still doing white fermentations cold when we were bringing in the reds. And of course, the reds, we want the opposite. We want 80-degree temperatures to extract all those great anthocyanins and flavors. So we have a geothermal winery. It's only the second one in New York State. So we have glycol circulating around for a mile underground, which keeps it at 54 degrees. And we run our fermentation tanks are jacketed with that. But that's only in the cooling cycle for the winery. So we had that running with the air conditioning on while we're trying to heat up the red grapes. So we had to bring them over to another building. Our tasting room was our old production area. So we have heat there. So we threw out our customers, packed the bottom floor of the tasting room, cranked up the heat. We just turned on our heat, I think, last week.
Oh, you have to do those little mini, like in Spain. Well, I'm sure it's in other regions too, but in Spain, there's a lot of wineries that have the little mini, like outdoor fire pits.
Yeah.
by each of the fermentation tanks that they just want to warm up that individual tank. And I think they literally pick it up and move it around.
Yeah,
that it's
we ferment in 1-ton bins. They're called macro bins, so we can forklift and move them around.
Okay.
And actually, our customers in the tasting room love it. We have a big picture window looking at the production area.
Of course.
And of course, we're doing punch downs. We have 15 tons of grapes fermenting over there. So, and occasionally we'll let the customers in the punch down grapes. They like it.
Oh yeah. Cheap labor. And they think they're being entertained. After they do it one time, they're done. They don't do punch downs aren't exactly
that. They like taking pictures of each other doing
yes.
Yeah.
And then they wake up the next morning. They wake up the next morning and they're like, "Oh, why am I sore?"
And then you get the "I love Lucy" jokes, right?
Yes.
Hey, Michael, can Traminette be aged?
It's usually recommended, on release, 1 or 2 years. Ours have never, I don't know, I should look. I may have some down in our wine library that it's probably 10 years old or something like that. It's usually not. You want to retain its freshness, and it's probably not going to benefit from aging, just the same as it wouldn't benefit from oak aging, probably just interfere with all the flavors that you're after. So ours are all in stainless steel tanks.
Stainless steel tanks. Okay. And once you're bottling?
Well, we have to settle it. We have to cold stabilize
it. But I mean, once you bottle, you go through that process. Sorry, you know what? I shouldn't cut you off because some people might not know that. So can you talk about cold stabilization and then?
Yeah, after the fermentation is completed, so that can take a couple of weeks depending on the temperature and the yeast. Talk about yeast selection too. When we first started, there were probably a dozen yeasts that you could choose from, and they were pretty much all the same. Didn't have anything special. But there was a real revolution in the 90s about going into vineyards throughout Europe and isolating the vineyard yeast that were on the grapes, and then commercializing them and releasing them. So right now, the books we have of yeast selections, probably there's 150 easily, maybe even more. Yeah. And you can dial it in if you want more of phenolics, or if you want a quicker fermentation or a slower fermentation, so you can control the kinetics of it, which are really important. Some of them are really voracious eaters. I won't call them pigs, but they need a lot of nutrients, and others don't require a lot of those. Some of them you have to be careful about, because if you stress the yeast and you don't have the right yeast assumable nitrogen, YAN, then they will go reductive on you. And you don't want that. At least I don't want it in my wine. So we have, I don't know, probably 15 yeast we use, and we use just the yeast that are on the grapes when they come in for our non-intervention wines, and they seem to be pretty good. But with those, you've got to put your nose in the tank every day and make sure that something isn't going south on you.
Right.
There's a lot more attention to detail.
You had said that you had made a non-intervention Traminette this year. How
Yeah.
did that come out?
That was great. It really just sold really well, and they are different. You know, I must say this. I've not been a proponent of just the natural yeast on there. Worrying about stuck fermentations and everything else. But if you have the right conditions on the grapes and it's clean and you don't have a lot of botrytis or other things, they really produce a different product. Those yeast are very, now it could be that they're not all Saccharomyces yeast, that there are 3 or 4 or 5 other types of yeast that there's different flavor profiles are produced. But we've been very happy with it. They're consistent and they're clean. And but there's a whole theory about that yeast may start the fermentation in your winery, but there is a dominant yeast that's taken over your space in your winery, and that's the yeast that's going to finish the fermentation.
The host yeast.
Right.
Oh wow!
So we have to settle the wine, and then we have to cold stabilize it, and precipitate tartrates, and
The
we
wine
do a lot
diet.
of that now. This is the Northeast. This is going to get down to near zero in the next few weeks or so, December, January. We move everything outside. We have a covered area at the winery. We move it outside and allow the cold temperatures to cold stabilize. So it saves energy.
Oh my gosh, that's brilliant.
Have to pump
Oh my
pipe off.
gosh.
All we have to do is pump the wine into the tank and then pump it back inside. And it works.
That's
really well.
great.
And it's cold now. It hardly got
Yeah,
above.
see, we don't have that luxury in Paso Robles.
Yeah. You don't. Although you get down to 20 degrees sometimes, right?
Yeah, but I don't think it's consistent enough for us to
No, it
stabilize by nature.
Takes us 3 weeks or so, depending on what.
And don't forget, it goes up every day. It's
Yeah,
only
right.
it's
So,
only like 20 something at night and then it goes right back up.
Yeah. No, we developed
So Michael,
ice cakes on the inside of the tanks.
Oh, okay.
so we've talked all about the wines, but when we drink wine, we also like to pair it with different foods.
Yeah.
So what
Well,
what do you think Traminette would pair well with?
Well, let's talk about what it tastes like. How we
Okay.
can talk about that. And it's really interesting that it really retains so much of the Gewürztraminer characteristics. So you'll get floral notes. Okay, put your nose in it. It's the first thing you're going to do, right? And I mentioned rose petals. You're going to smell orange blossoms. Very much. If you've got a good fermentation going on, you should definitely be smelling that. And sometimes jasmine. So that's a real nose full there. Fruity, it's described as. Then the same with Gewürztraminer as fruity. So I'm just looking at my notes here, but it's interesting to me. You do get apple notes, but then when I went back and I was tasting recently, it was Honeycrisp apples.
Oh, really?
No, not Granny Smith and not Macintosh, but there was a Honeycrisp note in it, which I found just sort of fascinating. And then citrus and apricot, but the main component that you're going to get is guava and lychee. That is the signature of Gewürztraminer, and it's great. It carried over. The beautiful mother produced. The children now have beautiful guava, and that's a chemical called 2-cis-rose oxide, and it's really prevalent in this. And that chemistry work was done at Cornell to discover what it was. But also it's spicy, and that's Gewürz. That means spice Traminer, is Gewürztraminer. And those spice notes are black pepper, cinnamon, and there was lemongrass and cloves, and ginger. So that spice box, that baking spice box, and then honey in terms of sort of texture, and also in terms of a bouquet hint. So those are the things you should be looking for. Of course, we all taste differently, but
Right.
I've often found even people that said that I say they can't taste anything, and you tell them, well, have you ever tasted guava or lychee? And that really is the predominant note that you're going to get. All the rest of them are, contributing players.
So what would you pair?
So would you pair? Okay. So I would pair it. The main thing I usually tell people to pair it with spicy Asian food.
Spicy Asian.
Yeah, it really goes well. A Thai green curry or dumplings with chili oil work really well.
Oh,
On the seafood end of things, oysters. Oysters are one of my favorite things to eat, and it goes really well with this. And cheese pairing Gruyere.
oh, okay.
Nice.
Yeah.
Now I'm hungry.
Yeah.
And if you have a bottle of Traminette,
Yeah.
drink it.
And
Oh
what
my
about
God.
if
Actually-
go ahead, Debbie.
Go ahead, Lori. No, go ahead.
No, I just was going to say, what about if it was the sweeter version of?
Yeah, the sweeter version, I would probably pair it with more on the dessert side of things to complement those baking spices that you saw. Also, this goes well with roasted meats. It does work well with roasted pork or chicken, especially if
I did
on the side with it too.
I did a wine pairing for this movie wine night. We used sweeter Gewürztraminer with cheesecake.
Yeah, sure.
So the Traminette, a sweeter part, probably would go well with
that.
cheesecake.
Yeah, exactly.
Interesting.
Yeah.
But the Asian food thing really works well, especially
Okay.
if it has some spice to it. There's just something about the Traminette that's thirst quenching.
Now, let me ask you this question, because with Asian food, as it can be spicy, would you need a Traminette that is got just a little bit of residual sugar, say 1%?
Yeah, it
Or would
could
it
work,
do
it
well
could
dry?
work better. I've not gone down that because most of our Traminettes are always dry. And,
Okay.
so, although we have made some in the past, our winemaking philosophy is if you have, and it's the German philosophy, it's all about balance. So if you have grapes that come in with super high acid, somewhere is, finished wine that is topping out at 9 grams per liter or 10 grams per liter of tartaric acid equivalent, then the only way to get that under control is to blend it with a low acid wine or to leave residual sugar in it. So we have a couple of wines that are on the semi-dry side, but it's usually no more than like 1.5% residual sugar. Very low. Our Wasning, our biggest seller, which is a blend of Saber and Vignol, two hybrids, that's usually comes in as a high acid wine because the Vignol never comes into the crush pad at under 10 grams per liter of acid. So the Saval tends to balance it off a little bit, but the best of them are some residual sugar. Right. And we'll do that with a sweet reserve. So we'll save some grape juice and then add that back in and at the end to sweeten it up. We're also adding flavor boost too.
All right. Well, I think this pretty much covers everything. Don't you think, Lori?
I do. We have a question from Michael. He just wants to make sure he knows where in California he can find Whitecliff Vineyard. And this Traminette.
we just distribute in New York. We self-distribute, so we don't have a distributor, and we ship to California. So
Okay.
when we have Traminette, you'll see it in our store. You'll see that it will be active and you can order it. And we do ship to California. We ship a lot of wine to California.
Okay.
But
So
we don't have a distributor because it's just,
I get it.
small enough, it just takes too much.
I know. So Michael, to answer your question, when Michael sends me my bottle, it will be on social media, and you will then know that that's the green light to reach out to Whitecliff Vineyard and get your order in.
Right. So just
So
go
Michael,
to whitecliffwine.com and just go to the store.
that's what I was just going to say. Tell everybody where they can find it, because
Yes.
when we re-air this podcast, people are going to want to know. So
Yeah.
Whitecliff.
Whitecliffwine.com, all one word.
And are you on the social media platforms?
Yes, we are. We have a Facebook page, Instagram page, all full of lots of information about what we're doing, what's being released, where we're going. We have a big Cabernet Franc tasting coming up in New York City.
Yay. So, which is a great segue, because tomorrow, although when this gets released, it will be past, but tomorrow is my beloved Cab Franc Day. And
Great.
lots of things are happening. So stay tuned to all of the socials about things that are happening. And there is a winemaker, a producer roundtable again tomorrow night at 6 p.m. Pacific time. So if you go to Exploring the Wine Glass, you will see the link to register for that. We have 5 winemakers who will be geeking out about Cab Franc. And then, Michael, maybe next time you can join in. I will add you, if you're not already there, to the distribution list for the Cab Franc stuff.
Yes, definitely do that. It's
Oh, we
all-
have somebody, Georgie was tuning in from the Finger Lakes and said this was wonderful, and they are going to check out Whitecliff on social.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you,
Thanks
Georgie.
for Georging. Thanks for
Yes,
Georging,
thank you
Georgie.
for
Thanks
coming.
for joining.
Thanks.
Well,
Love
Michael,
joining.
thank you so much for
Thank you.
coming in and giving us your precious, valuable time, plus all of your knowledge on Traminette.
Oh,
I am
yes.
super excited for when it gets released and I can try it and see what it's all about, because your descriptors are all right up my alley. So
Oh, it's a wonderful. I've had Traminette, and I absolutely love it.
Yeah.
So
It's a good one. And it's
Yeah.
nice to put something out there for the public that they may not know or have been exposed to. But for us, it's really popular. We sell out all the time. We're now thinking about, we got to plant more acreage. So
there you go.
probably new vineyard expansion.
there you go.
There'll be
Your
room
wife
for
is
something else.
cringing right now.
Yeah. No more grapes.
So hopefully maybe I'll come up and we can sit down and do a Traminette tasting.
Yes, that would
Together.
be wonderful. Yep,
And we
let's
can
do that.
video it and as a, addition to the podcast
Excellent.
or
Yeah.
and then in the webinar.
You can
So-
taste, by that time you can taste out of the tank and see what it's.
Oh, that'd be cool.
dressing.
That'd be cool. So, well, thank you so much.
It's lovely,
And,
ladies. Thank you. Thank you very
we'll
much.
let you get back to your day, and it's been wonderful. You got so much knowledge, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Anytime. Bye now.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
You are special, so very, very special.
This has been another episode of Exploring the Wine Glass. Thanks for listening. If you have suggestions on what topics you would like me to discuss, please reach out on social media. You can find me on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook as Exploring the Wine Glass. I am also on LinkedIn as Lori Hoyt Budd. Of course, you can always email me at exploringthewineglass@gmail.com and sign up for my newsletter at exploringthewineglass.com. If you enjoyed what you heard, please rate, review, and subscribe to help others find me more easily. And most importantly, tell your wine-loving friends, because if you like the podcast, they will too. Podcast music is Wine by Kevins. Until next week, slancha.
Let you go. No, never let you go. I want a nice glass right now.